Welcome to the Facebook studios live at the Raisina Dialogue 2019 in Delhi. Our topic for discussion over the next 10-12 minutes is about women in power getting there and staying there. We have with us Major General Susan Ridge from the British Armed Forces and Daisy Amdany, is that right?
Yes.
Who works in advocacy in Kenya. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here. Very different roles for both of you. Major Ridge, let me start with you. The topic is quite self-evident. How did you decide to join the armed forces? You're a lawyer with the armed forces in the UK, right?
Yes.
And you know, how tough was it as a woman?
Well, I joined the army in as long ago as 1992, and I was already qualified as a lawyer. I'm a solicitor. And I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to do something interesting, and I thought that the army offered that opportunity. It meant moving round, and it meant an interesting area of work and a more diverse area of work, and so I applied. You had to go through a selection process that was quite hard and quite different to what I'd been used to, because I came from a very sort of office background, and even the selection board sort of took you out of the sort of comfort of that. Joining, because how difficult was it? Well, because I'd wanted to do something different, and this was so different. And to be honest, I didn't really know what to expect. I think ignorance was definitely bliss. So I sort of encountered each new environment with a sort of sense of, oh right, okay, this is how it works, and we'll get through this, and it will be fine. And yes, training, you know, doing the sort of basic training for the army was something of a shock to the system, but actually it was just one of those things that you learned to do and got on with it. So.
And you know, training, was it training for combat as well? Have you ever been in active combat zones? Have you performed legal duties in those areas, or has it always been back in the UK?
No, it hasn't been in the UK. When you talk about being in combat, I date from the days, so I've done time in Bosnia on a number of tours in Bosnia, but most of my officers now will have done tours in Afghanistan and Iraq at the very least, and will have done necessarily sometimes a number of tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. And though they may not be working necessarily with frontline units, they will be based with headquarters, and they may go out to forward operating bases, because the whole point is that you're deployable lawyers. So you go where the army wants you to go, at the time and place of the army's choosing.
All right, we'll come back to you in a moment, but Daisy, just, you know, coming in on this, because from the Indian perspective as well, women have been trying for a long time and have made strides, especially in the armed forces. I mean, they're now talking about women fighter pilots in the Indian Air Force, which is a great thing. But it's taken a long time to get to this space, because conventionally, especially in our society here, and perhaps you can shed light on Kenya as well, is that there were certain roles that were not seen as appropriate for women to be part of. We're breaking glass ceilings every day, and might I say it, we're better than men at most of what they're capable of doing. We're way better. But, you know, how does that work for you in advocacy? Do people listen when you say that, you know, what you can do, these women can do better?
First of all, I don't subscribe to that mantra that what a man can do, a woman can do better. I think that it's important for us because when we say that, it is framed as though we are speaking about role reversal.
Right.
Whereas the whole idea behind women's empowerment and women's inclusion is a shared space, that it's a partnership, that women have capabilities. And we've had systems, the systems that have traditionally excluded women, giving them specific roles that were seen more as soft roles, so that women and power, women and authority, especially authority in political power or in the armed forces, was not seen as a space for women.
Right.
But remember that also decades ago, women were not being educated. but we broke those barriers, and women are being educated, and we have several capable women. So you cannot continue to have systems that hold women back. So our advocacy is based on ensuring that we have frameworks that dismantle those barriers, the systemic barriers, whether they are legal, whether they are cultural, and also socialization, because remember that a lot of it is part of also the socialization,
Right.
how we are raised, so that women and men have been raised in such a way as to suggest that men have privileges in certain areas that women were not allowed to get into. So that becomes very important. And for us in Kenya, you know, we promulgated a new constitution in 2010 that essentially outlaws any kind of discrimination and requires equal opportunity in every sphere, including the economic, political, and social spheres. So
But just as a
the
quick
dismantling.
as a quick follow-up to that, the fact that it's been outlawed on paper, I mean, that's on paper.
Yes.
Misogyny is in the mind. Or in society. You talk about socialization. It takes a long time to change social behavior and social attitudes. How is that working out?
That is true. It does take time to re-socialize people to the idea, but the laws work to help in leapfrogging
Okay.
those the time frame. For instance, with us in Kenya, despite the fact that we have a framework, constitutional framework that requires not more than 2/3 in elective and appointed positions, we still haven't gotten there. We have a cabinet that is not compliant. We have a parliament that is not compliant. Appointments, ambassador appointments, you know, PSs still are not compliant. And we continue to go to court, you know, to assert those rights. But on the other hand, we also work with communities, particularly women, starting with women, because you know there's always this accusation that women don't support women,
Right.
that women make half of the population, therefore they have the numbers to make the change. But we forget that part of that lack of support systems is also because of the marginalization and socialization that they've been through. They've been socialized the same way
The
as
same
men
way
have.
as the men.
So we work with them to help them see that it is actually for their own benefit and for their own empowerment, because when you talk about power and when you talk about the exercise of power, remember that that is where decisions affecting livelihoods are made. The decisions about resource allocation, about development agenda, prioritization of these agenda, and it affects day-to-day lives.
Right.
So we believe and we seek to ensure that women's voices are on the table. We cannot continue to have situation where it is men making decisions for women only. We want to have a more balanced approach to decision making.
So it's interesting that because I think the point of socialization is a conversation we in India are definitely having, and in the wake of sort of the Me Too agitations we've seen around the world, we talk about changing the way boys are brought up. So I want to ask you, in the United Kingdom as well, you know, conventionally we say that the feminist movement, which started in the United States or in the West and has moved eastwards, we're sort of, we're perhaps in a place where others have been a few years before us. I don't know if that's true, but that's the narrative that we get. But in the armed forces, what do you think are the challenges and are the responses to socialized patriarchy or misogyny? Are there any?
I think some of the work that's been done over recent years has been quite liberating in some ways. It hasn't solely focused on women either. There's been a much greater understanding that people need to, that the army is maybe not their whole life.
Okay.
And that within that time within the army, you need to allow people flexibility. Flexibility in the way they work, flexibility in the way they're approached. So things that never happened when I joined the army, like being able to work from home, being able to work compressed hours. And that's not just about women with children and enabling them to stay in the military. It's also about recognising that increasingly people may be carers for family members. They may have other interests. And just approaching the work-life balance differently. And that of itself creates changes because it makes the ability to stay in the army much easier, to join and stay much easier. And we become a more attractive prospect. I think there's also been considerable moves to recognise the progression of women in the army, and but not in the sense that it's promoting women, but understanding that women bring a real benefit, that the army needs to reflect UK society, and that to reflect UK society, it is about trying to attract as many elements of that society as you can. And if you do that, then you have a much more effective armed forces.
Right. Daisy, before we wrap up, I want to ask you, given that you're working in the field of advocacy and policy making as well, not just as a civil society actor in terms of community work, but what would your advice be to women in India who are also fighting the same cause as you are, who are also trying to implement policy changes and new frameworks that are more inclusive towards all sections of society, including women?
I think my advice to women, not just in India but around the world, is that we need to build multi-pronged strategies of solidarity. Because while women are very good at building solidarity at local level and community level, when it comes to higher up, you find that there's some kind of gap, there's fragmentation, so that you find there is allegations of, grassroots versus elite women, and that kind of thing. And, and it always happens. These are the accusations that are brought together. But we need to build a shared understanding as women of the importance of supporting women who are in power. Because take, for instance, Susan here, with her uniform as a woman, just by representation and presence, she is already breaking those barriers, because young women, young girls will see her and say that they can aspire to be that.
That's right.
So just like we have powerful women in India holding very substantive positions, they are an inspiration to young women, so that even at the cultural level, where young girls are being told you cannot do this, but they can see that there's a woman who is the Minister for Defense.
But she's doing it,
and she's the Minister for Trade and all that. So we need to build solidarity, a shared understanding, so that the women in power are not far removed from the grassroots women. We have to have that touch that brings the humanity, I think, that women bring, to leadership and decision making, so that we have the support networks that allow women to not only get into power, but to stay in power. Because as the majority of the population, if we organize ourselves, then
there's
the
no
sky
stopping.
is the limit.
Sky is the limit, right. Thank you so much. That's a really great point to end this conversation on. Susan and Daisy, both thank you very much. And as you said, solidarity, the way forward. So hopefully that lesson will be passed down generations, and we can all do that. Thanks very much.
Thank you.